Karl Friedrich Benz, November 25, 1844 – April 4, 1929, was a German engine designer and automobile engineer. His Benz Patent Motorcar from 1885 is considered the first practical motorcar. He received a patent for the motorcar on January 29, 1886. Early life. Karl Benz was born Karl Friedrich Michael Vaillant on November 25, 1844 in Mühlberg, now a borough of Karlsruhe, Baden-Württemberg, which is part of modern Germany, to Josephine Vaillant and a locomotive driver, Johann Georg Benz, whom she married a few months later. According to German law, the child acquired the name Benz by legal marriage of his parents Benz and Vaillant. When he was 2 years old, his father died of pneumonia, and his name was changed to Karl Friedrich Benz in remembrance of his father. Despite living in near poverty, his mother strove to give him a good education. Benz attended the local grammar school in Karlsruhe and was a prodigious student. In 1853, at the age of 9, he started at the scientifically oriented Lyceum. Next he studied at the Polytechnical University under the instruction of Ferdinand Redenbacher. Benz had originally focused his studies on locksmithing, but he eventually followed his father's steps toward locomotive engineering. On September 30, 1860, at age 15, he passed the entrance exam for mechanical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe, which he subsequently attended. Benz graduated July 9, 1864, aged 19. During these years, while riding his bicycle, he started to envision concepts for a vehicle that would eventually become the horseless carriage. Following his formal education, Benz had 7 years of professional training in several companies, but did not fit well in any of them. The training started in Karlsruhe with 2 years of varied jobs in a mechanical engineering company. He then moved to Mannheim to work as a draftsman and designer in a scales factory. In 1868 he went to Pforzheim to work for a bridge-building company, Gebruder Benckiser Eisenwerke und Maschinenfabrik. Finally, he went to Vienna for a short period to work at an iron construction company. Benz's first factory and early inventions. In 1871, at the age of 27, Karl Benz joined August Ritter in launching the iron foundry and mechanical workshop in Mannheim, later renamed Factory for Machines for Sheet Metal Working. The enterprise's first year went very badly. Ritter turned out to be unreliable, and the business's tools were impounded. The difficulty was overcome when Benz's fiancée, Bertha Ringer, bought out Ritter's share in the company using her dowry. On July 20, 1872, Karl Benz and Bertha Ringer married. They had 5 children: Eugen, Richard, Clara, Thild, and Ellen. Despite the business misfortunes, Karl Benz led in the development of new engines in the early factory he and his wife owned. To get more revenues, in 1878 he began to work on new patents. First, he concentrated all his efforts on creating a reliable petrol 2-stroke engine. Benz finished his 2-stroke engine on December 31, 1878, New Year's Eve, and was granted a patent for it in 1879. Karl Benz showed his real genius, however, through his successive inventions registered while designing what would become the production standard for his 2-stroke engine. Benz soon patented the speed regulation system, the ignition using sparks with battery, the spark plug, the carburetor, the clutch, the gear shift, and the water radiator. Benz's gas motor and Fabrik Mannheim. Problems arose again when the banks at Mannheim demanded that Bertha and Karl Benz's enterprise be incorporated due to the high production costs it maintained. The Benzes were forced to improvise, and a association with photographer Emil Bühler and his brother, in order to get additional bank support. The company became the joint stock company Gasmotorenfabrik Mannheim in 1882. After all the necessary incorporation agreements, Benz was unhappy because he was left with merely 5% of the shares and a modest position as director. Worst of all, his ideas weren't considered when designing new products, so he withdrew from that corporation just 1 year later, in 1883. Benz and Amp, CIE, and the Benz Patent Motorwagen. Benz's lifelong hobby brought him to a bicycle repair shop in Mannheim owned by Max Rose and Friedrich Wilhelm Esslinger. In 1883, the three founded a new company producing industrial machines, Benz and Amp Company Rheinische Gasmotorenfabrik, usually referred to as Benz and Amp, CIE. Quickly growing to 25 employees, it soon began to produce static gas engines as well. The success of the company gave Benz the opportunity to indulge in his old passion of designing a horseless carriage. Based on his experience with and fondness for bicycles, he used similar technology when he created an automobile. It featured wire wheels with a 4-stroke engine of his own design between the rear wheels, with a very advanced coil ignition and evaporative cooling rather than a radiator. Power was transmitted by means of 2 roller chains to the rear axle. Karl Benz finished his creation in 1885 and named it the Benz Patent Motorwagen. It was the first automobile entirely designed as such to generate its own power, not simply a motorized stagecoach, a horse carriage, which is why Karl Benz was granted his patent and is regarded as its inventor. The Motorwagen was patented on January 29, 1886 as DRP 37435, automobile fueled by gas. The 1885 version was difficult to control, leading to a collision with a wall during a public demonstration. The first successful tests on public roads were carried out in the early summer of 1886. The next year Benz created the Motorwagen Model 2, which had several modifications, and in 1887 the definitive Model 3 with wooden wheels was introduced, showing at the Paris Expo the same year. Benz began to sell the vehicle in the late summer of 1888, making it the first commercially available automobile in history. The second customer of the Motorwagen was a Parisian bicycle manufacturer Emil Roger, who had already been building Benz engines under license from Karl Benz for several years. Roger added the Benz automobiles to the line he carried in Paris, and initially most were sold there. The early 1888 version of the Motorwagen had no gears and could not climb hills unaided. This limitation was rectified after Bertha Benz made her famous trip driving one of the vehicles a great distance and suggested to her husband the addition of another gear. Bertha Benz's long-distance drive. An important part in the Benz story is this first long-distance automobile trip, where the entrepreneurial Bertha Benz, supposedly without the knowledge of her husband, on the morning of August 5, 1888, took this vehicle on a 106 kilometers trip from Mannheim to Pforzheim to visit her mother, taking her sons Eugen and Richard with her. In addition to having to locate pharmacies on the way to fuel up, she repaired various technical and mechanical problems and invented brake lining. After some longer downhill slopes, she ordered a shoemaker to nail leather on the brake blocks. Bertha Benz and Sons finally arrived at nightfall, announcing the achievement to Karl by telegram. It had been her intention to demonstrate the feasibility of using the Benz Motorwagen for travel and to generate publicity in the manner now referred to as live marketing. Today, the event is celebrated every 2 years in Germany with an antique automobile rally. In 2008, Bertha Benz Memorial Route was officially approved as a route of industrial heritage of mankind, because it follows Bertha Benz's tracks of the world's first long-distance journey by automobile in 1888. Now everybody can follow the 194 kilometers of sign-posted route from Mannheim via Heidelberg to Pforzheim and back. The return trip was along a different, slightly shorter itinerary, as shown on the maps of the Bertha Benz Memorial Route. Benz's Model 3 made its wide-scale debut to the world in the 1889 World's Fair in Paris. About 25 motorwagens were built between 1886 and 1893. Benz and Amp CIE expansion. The great demand for stationary, static internal combustion engines forced Karl Benz to enlarge the factory in Mannheim, and in 1886 a new building located on Waldhofstrasse was added. Benz and Amp CIE had grown in the interim from 50 employees in 1889 to 430 in 1899. During the last years of the 19th century, Benz was the largest automobile company in the world with 572 units produced in 1899. Because of its size, in 1899, Benz and Amp CIE became a joint stock company with the arrival of Friedrich von Fischer and Julius Ganz, who came aboard as members of the Board of Management. Ganz worked in the commercialization department, which is somewhat similar to marketing in contemporary corporations. The new directors recommended that Benz should create a less expensive automobile suitable for mass production. In 1893, Karl Benz created the Victoria, a two-passenger automobile with a 2.2 kilowatts engine, which could reach the top speed of 18 kilometers per hour and had a pivotal front axle operated by a roller chain tiller for steering. The model was successful with 85 units sold in 1893. The Benz Velo also participated in the world's first automobile race, the 1894 Paris-Rouen, where Émile Roger finished 14th. After covering the 126 kilometers in 10 hours 01 minute at an average speed of 12.7 kilometers per hour. In 1895, Benz designed the first truck in history, with some of the units later modified by the first motorbus company, the Netpfner, becoming the first motorbuses in history. In 1896, Karl Benz was granted a patent for his design of the first flat engine. It had horizontally opposed pistons, a design in which the corresponding pistons reached top dead center simultaneously, thus balancing each other with respect to momentum. Flat engines with 4 or fewer cylinders are most commonly called Boxer engines, Boxer motor in German, and also are known as horizontally opposed engines. This design is still used by Porsche, Subaru, and some high-performance engines used in racing cars. In motorcycles, the most famous Boxer engine is found in BMW Motorrad, though the Boxer engine design was used in many other models, including Victoria, Harley-Davidson XA, Zundap, Wooler, Douglas Dragonfly, Radia, Universal, IMZ Ural, D&EPR, Nomeiron, Changjiang, Marusho, and the Honda Goldwing. Although Gottlieb Daimler died in March 1900, and there is no evidence that Benz and Daimler knew each other nor that they knew about each other's early achievements. Eventually, competition with Daimler Motor and Gesellschaft in Stuttgart began to challenge the leadership of Benz and Amp CIE. In October 1900, the main designer of DMG, Wilhelm Maybach, built the engine that would later be used in the Mercedes-35 horsepower of 1902. The engine was built to the specifications of Emil Jelinek under a contract for him to purchase 36 vehicles with the engine, and for him to become a dealer of the Special Series. Jelinek stipulated the new engine be named Daimler-Mercedes. Maybach would quit DMG in 1907, but he designed the model and all of the important changes. After testing, the first was delivered to Jelinek on December 22, 1900. Jelinek continued to make suggestions for changes to the model and obtained good results racing the automobile in the next few years, encouraging DMG to engage in commercial production of automobiles, which they did in 1902. Benz countered with Parsifal, introduced in 1903 with a vertical twin engine that achieved a top speed of 60 km/h. Then, without consulting Benz, the other directors hired some French designers. France was a country with an extensive automobile industry based on Maybach's creations. Because of this action, after difficult discussions, Karl Benz announced his retirement from design management on January 24, 1903, although he remained as director on the board of management through its merger with DMG in 1926 and remained on the board of the new Daimler-Benz Corporation until his death in 1929. He was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame in 1984 and the European Automotive Hall of Fame. Benz's sons Eugen and Richard left Benz and Amp CIE in 1903, but Richard returned to the company in 1904 as the designer of passenger vehicles. That year, sales of Benz and Amp CIE reached 3,480 automobiles, and the company remained the leading manufacturer of automobiles, along with continuing as a director of Benz and Amp CIE. Karl Benz would soon found another company, C. Benz Sona, a privately held company for manufacturing automobiles. The brand name used the first initial of the French variant of Benz's first name, Karl. Blitzen Benz. In 1909, the Blitzen Benz was built in Mannheim by Benz and Amp CIE. The bird-beaked vehicle had a 21.5-liter 150 kilowatts engine, and on November 9, 1909, in the hands of Victor Emery of France, the land speed racer at Brooklands set a record of 226.91 km/h, said to be faster than any plane, train, or automobile at the time, a record that was not exceeded for 10 years by any other vehicle. It was transported to several countries, including the United States, to establish multiple records of this achievement. Benz Sona, Karl Benz, Bertha Benz, and the son, Eugen, moved 10 kilometers east of Mannheim to live in nearby Ladenburg, and solely with their own capital, founded the private company, C. Benz Sons in 1906, producing automobiles and gas engines. The latter type was replaced by petrol engines because lack of demand. This company never issued stocks publicly, building its own line of automobiles independently from Benz and Amp CIE, which was located in Mannheim. The Benz Sons automobiles were of good quality and became popular in London as taxis. In 1912, Karl Benz liquidated all of his shares in Benz Sons and left the family-held company in Ladenburg to Eugen and Richard, but he remained as a director of Benz and Amp CIE. During a birthday celebration for him in his hometown of Karlsruhe on November 25, 1914, the 70-year-old Karl Benz was awarded an honorary doctorate by his alma mater, the Karlsruhe University, thereby becoming Dr. Ing. H.C. Karl Benz. Almost from the very beginning of the production of automobiles, participation in sports car racing became a major method to gain publicity for manufacturers. At first, the production models were raced and the Benz Velo participated in the first automobile race, Paris to Rouen, 1894. Later, Investment in developing race cars for motorsports produced returns through sales generated by the association of the name of the automobile with the winners. Unique race vehicles were built at the time, as seen in the photograph here of the Benz, the first mid-engine and aerodynamically designed Tropfenwagen, a teardrop body introduced at the 1923 European Grand Prix at Monza. In the last production year of the Benz Sons Company, 1923, 350 units were built. During the following year, 1924, Karl Benz built 2 additional 8/25 of a horsepower units of the automobile manufactured by this company, tailored for his personal use, which he never sold. They are still preserved. Toward Daimler-Benz and the first Mercedes-Benz in 1926. The German economic crisis worsened. In 1923, Benz and CIE produced only 1,382 units in Mannheim, and DMG made only 1,020 in Stuttgart. The average cost of an automobile was 25 million marks because of rapid inflation. Negotiations between the two companies resumed, and in 1924 they signed an agreement of mutual interest, valid until the year 2000. Both enterprises standardized design, production, purchasing, sales, and advertising, marketing their automobile models jointly, although keeping the respective brands. On June 28, 1926, Benz and CIE and DMG finally merged as the Daimler-Benz Company, baptizing all of its automobiles Mercedes-Benz, honoring the most important model of the DMG automobiles, the 1902 Mercedes 35 horsepower, along with the Benz name. The name of that DMG model had been selected after 10-year-old Mercedes Jelinek, the daughter of Emil Jelinek, who had set the specifications for the new model. Between 1900 and 1909 he was a member of DMG's board of management, and long before the merger Jelinek had resigned, Karl Benz was a member of the new Daimler-Benz board of management for the remainder of his life. A new logo was created, consisting of a 3-pointed star surrounded by traditional laurels from the Benz logo, and the brand of all of its automobiles was labeled Mercedes-Benz. Model names would follow the brand name in the same convention as today. The next year, 1927, the number of units sold tripled to 7,918, and the diesel line was launched for truck production. In 1928, the Mercedes-Benz SSK was presented. On April 4, 1929, Karl Benz died at home in Ladenburg at the age of 84 from a bronchial inflammation. Until her death on May 5, 1944, Bertha Benz continued to reside in the last home. Members of the family resided in the home for 30 more years. The Benz home now has been designated as historic and is used as a scientific meeting facility for a non-profit foundation, the Gottlieb Daimler and Karl Benz Foundation, that honors both Bertha and Karl Benz for the roles in the history of automobiles. In popular culture, in 2011, a dramatized television movie about the life of Karl and Bertha Benz was made, named Karl and Bertha, which premiered on the 11th of May and was aired by Das Erste on the 23rd of May. A trailer of the movie and a making-of special were released on YouTube.